Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Heidegger, Wonder at the World. The theme of wonder was very interesting to Heidegger and surprisingly also to Winnicott. It is a theme less talked about in psychoanalysis. To discuss this very interesting but less talked about theme, we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, can we start with the first question, which is what was Heidegger's fascination with wonder?
Philosophy can originate in a variety of stations. Philosophy can have its origin in wonder. Philosophy can also have its origin in the injustice in the world. Philosophy can also be classified into scholastic philosophy and living philosophy. Similarly, philosophers also can be classified into scholastic philosophers and living philosophers. Spinoza, Hegel, Kant, they were essentially scholastic philosophers. Krishna, uh, Confucius, Lenin, they were essentially living philosophers. Heidegger, because he is an existential philosopher, he is one of those who is in that group of living philosophy. So Heidegger, when he talks about wonder, there are many things he sends out in his talking about wonder or his in his appreciation or his uh, praise of wonder. One, he is giving a call to philosophy to return from being a scholastic philosophy to being a living philosophy. Two, he is asking philosophy to revisit the wonder which it had in the Greek times and which the Western civilization has lost touch with after the advent of Christianity and even more so after the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Heidegger is also giving a call to take a pause from this uh, slavery of technological domination over us and the domination of corporates and commerce over us and re-enter those states of naturalness where wonder becomes natural. So it is also a call to revisit the deeper natural parts of ourselves, where being there, we can experience a natural wonder. Heidegger is also giving a call for philosophy to really go back to where it belongs more, and that is to answer the questions of big why and not get bogged down in questions of how or the small why, which science is much better prepared to answer. So he says if uh, you ask a question, why does the immune system work in the human organism? You will say in order to preserve itself. And if you say why does it want to preserve itself, you will infer there is a will to live. But if you ask the question, why should the will to live be there at all? Now, this is a question that creates astonishment in us. Astonishment, which we realize when we look at ourselves. The first astonishment that we exist, the second astonishment that the world exists, and the third astonishment at the processes which go on within ourselves and outside, and the astonishment at the purpose and origin. So this astonishment is what the modern day man has lost. And this is where Heidegger revisits wonder. And his revisit has multiple purposes as he gets into an infatuation with wonder, both conceptually and in a living sense.
What did he mean when he said it astonished the Greek alone?
Heidegger traces the history of philosophy, and Heidegger realizes that it was only in the Greek times that this astonishment at the world, this primary natural astonishment at finding ourselves in the world, this primary natural, this primary natural astonishment was there so much in the Greek times. And he sees in Socrates a natural primal astonishment at the way people speak and people think on the world. He doesn't take it for granted like we do. He finds it astonishing the way people think and speak and act right in the society, in the marketplace. So there was a sense of astonishment in Socrates at the society, in the marketplace. Aristotle had this sense of astonishment for the living world, and he laid the basis of science. Plato had this astonishment for the metaphysical world and the human collectivity, and he created something for those two areas. And this astonishment, which was so natural in the Greek civilization, has got lost after the Greek civilization went off. And then we have a very different kind of a philosophy, which has lost that life, that touch with the naturalness, which has become more scholastic, more cerebral, and completely, not completely, but largely unnatural. And this, for Heidegger, is a very important point because he says this primal sense of natural astonishment was experienced by the Greeks and the Greeks alone. And of course, he has in mind only the Western philosophy because in the East, uh, there has been a completely different tradition of philosophy and spirituality, where this astonishment with the world, where this at one man with oneself, being in nature, and this sort of being one with oneself or finding one's own oneness. This was very natural for a complete tradition of spiritual masters and philosophers, but Heidegger is referring essentially to the Western philosophy. And for him, the revisit to the Greek philosophy and uh, re-entering and reincorporating this astonishment in life, this astonishment at the world, is a very central part for creating the living philosophy.
This to me sounds like the wonder of a child. I mean,
Yes,
a childlike wonder.
yes. And we will see as we go along that wonder comes in all colors and flavors. And there is a wonder of Winnicott and a wonder of Heidegger and a wonder of a child.
Oh, okay. So now when we naturally come to Winnicott. How does Winnicott bring in the idea of wonder in psychoanalysis?
Uh, Winnicott is one of those few psychoanalytic thinkers who have engaged with the healthy part of the human mind. Psychoanalysis has this obsessive compulsive personality disorder of being obsessed with the gloomy, pathological, and perverted part of life. Psychoanalysis has this terrifying fear of being close to good objects. Winnicott is one of those few people who go into the positive aspect of life, and three things stand out in our discussion, for our discussion. One, the idea, Winnicott's concept of uh, capacity of wonder. Second, capacity of play. And third, capacity to be alone. These three capacities are very important to Winnicott from health and quality of life point of view. And the capacity to be alone rests on many things, including the capacity of wonder and the capacity of play. And the capacity of play can originate in many things. One of the things which can feed the capacity of play is the capacity of wonder. So the three capacities are associated in some ways. For Winnicott, the capacity to wonder was very important. And this capacity to wonder, one was into itself psychologically a very gratifying and satisfying state. Two, it was a very productive state. And three, it could lead to art and it could lead to a state of mind where what he calls the unorganizing of the ego takes place without the disorganizing of the ego, disintegration of the ego. Let me put it in a different way. The state of organization leads to a state of unorganization rather than a state of disintegration. So the ego recedes without disintegrating and allows this creative, playful process to happen. So you are neither overwhelmed by the fantasy component like in psychosis, nor you are completely in the real world. It is in a transitional state where reality and fantasy both can play constructively together and allow this state of creativity, wonder, and the state of uh, unorganized positive satisfaction to go on. And this for Winnicott was very essential component of good healthy life. And Winnicott saw this wonder in children also, which soon was extinguished because of educational or cultural training, or maybe there is a natural component also to that. But for Winnicott, the capacity for wonder was something to be cherished, something to be developed, and a very significant part of our healthy life, our health, and our quality of life.
Can we compare and contrast the ideas of Heidegger and Winnicott as far as this concept of wonder is concerned?
Uh, Winnicott's concept of wonder is related to wonder that one experiences in response to something usually. It is the wonder of the artist, it is the wonder of the ordinary person. It is the wonder in its all implications that one feels inside when one looks at something. And when one starts inquiring into something because of wonder, the inquiry largely is a general person's inquiry or a psychological inquiry or an artistic inquiry. It is not a philosophical inquiry like Heidegger's sense of wonder leads to. So both are talking about wonder. There is obviously overlap in the two because they are talking about the same thing, but there are shades of difference. Let us say we see a flower on a relaxed afternoon, and in response to that, we are filled with wonder. We are filled with wonder related to the whole phenomena of seeing the flower. of the feelings or the psychological states it releases inside. The appreciation and the whole process of aesthetic uh, experience which goes on inside. The gratification of what we call the rasa, or the experience of the beauty and all that it releases inside of us. And maybe a few questions related to how it happens, or what is the flower about, or how the blooming has taken place. These are essentially uh, four aspects of wonder related to that of an ordinary person or an artist. Uh, Roughly speaking, they are more related to the consequences of experiencing something existing. Whereas Heidegger, looking at it, would put the question, why should it exist in the first place? The astonishment that it exists. And this astonishment at something existing is going into its origin and antecedents rather than its consequences inside of us. So the flavor of wonder is slightly different. It is more associated in Heidegger's mind with origin, with antecedents. It's more of an ontological wonder than a consequential wonder of experience. And uh, it is interesting to note that in Heidegger's sense of wonder or in Winnicott's sense of wonder, neither of them actually can capture what existence of that flower actually is. So the existence of an entity is not captured either by Winnicottian sense of wonder or Heideggerian sense of wonder. That existence of an entity remains always elusive to fathom, because uh, it's very difficult for one entity to actually feel the existence of another entity in an existential sense as that entity feels it. So we only have a, a, a processed second person idea about something else's existence. And in an existential sense, the existence of the other virtually becomes something like the thing in itself about which we cannot know anything with finality and certainty.
Why is it so difficult for psychoanalysis to incorporate more of wonder into its conceptual arena?
Psychoanalysis has this obsession with the negative because the premise essentially is Freudian Kleinian in the general spirit of the science. In that context, the basic model of the man is that of something emerging from the animal or matter. And therefore, all the good in man essentially is derived out of some defensive operation from something not good in man. And what is elemental and natural are things associated with only survival, aggression, pleasure, and all the instinctual forces. Anything that we call the higher in man is essentially out of defensive work done on something more difficult and more basal. That being the spirit, it is very difficult for psychoanalysis to bring in not only wonder, but any other positive aspect of the human side. Take, for example, the superego strength or superego happiness. Take, for example, the idea that we should strengthen the positive parts of the personality before we open up the negative parts. Take, for example, the idea that meaning in life provides great strength to the psyche and to the ego. All these ideas are very difficult for psychoanalysis to bring in because of this obsession with the negative. I think it also has to do with the kind of people uh, who are into psychoanalysis, because most of them are essentially sick people, patients who have turned into teachers, patients who have turned into masters. And this has a bearing on the way uh, they do conceptualization. And the second difficulty is the identification with the aggressor has created such a community of negatively oriented, reductionist, uh, gloomy, narcissistic, sadistic, masochistic kind of people, that the whole process of training and supervision and the whole process of peer group uh, assessment, when it comes to journal publications and conferences and the whole circus that goes with it, is such that it's very difficult for anyone with a holistic or positive mindset to emerge out of that circus as a well-known or popular or respected person. Most of them would get filtered out because of the bias. And this has created a difficulty for incorporating anything positive or holistic into psychoanalysis. And I think the concept of wonder, along with other such concepts, have met a similar fate, that they have been inadequately appreciated, inadequately leveraged for either healing or for quality of life. And let me not go to personal comments on the masters of psychoanalysis, but let us rest there without going into that.
How did Freud see this?
I think I did not want to go there, but I will have to go there. In the sense that the masters of psychoanalysis, most of them have been very sick people themselves. And Freud is no exception. Not that they were not geniuses, they have done what you and I won't do in 10 lives. It's a different aspect. But that doesn't take away what was there in the personality. And Freud saw this essentially as uh, mostly coming out of scopophilia turning into curiosity. And he never thought of the sense of wonder as a component instinct. So the closest component instinct we are born with is scopophilia, turning to curiosity, turning to search for knowledge. And one would place wonder somewhere on the continuum, but it would essentially be a derivative of the scopophilia in some way or the other. Freud also found it very difficult to see this as a very strong element in human nature or a desirable element in human nature. Although he himself had a lot of wonder, and you wonder why he did not dwell on wonder so much, since he himself had so much of it. But he did not.
Can
In
you elaborate? I mean, this wonder part, what Freud saw, that would be very interesting for us to know.
uh, Freud had this strange combination of quite an amount of wonder and quite an amount of reductionism. So he would read lot of stuff, but reduce it ultimately to what he believed in. For example, he read a lot about anthropology. Jung also read about anthropology, but both of them took the reading into very different directions. For Freud, it resulted in totem and taboo and such kind of other publications, which were like a kind of a confirmation of his essential conceptual foundation. Whereas for Jung, it led to a completely different discovery of the collective unconscious. Not that this was the only point, there were many points which led to collective unconscious, but one of the points was his extensive reading of the mind of the uh, primitive people, or let me not say primitive people, let us say those living in the natural condition. cut off usually from civilization, not civilization, let's say the 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 city society that you and I are a part of. So Freud had this sense of wonder, the sense of curiosity to go into art, to go into literature, to go into philosophy, to go into anthropology, but ultimately to reduce everything down to his own framework. So there was a two parallel lines, a strong sense of wonder and a strong sense of reductionism. Jung had a strong sense of wonder, but not so much a sense of reductionism, and therefore his conceptual foundations much wider. Whether we agree with it or not, second issue, but into themselves they were much wider than what Freud would see. And one of the difficulties today is the broad non-incorporation of the positive aspects of the human psyche into psychoanalysis. I think that is one aspect. The second aspect is Winnicott is not being used as much in psychoanalysis as many of the other thinkers are. That's the second part of it. And the third part of it is about the culture in which we live. There is too much of force of technology and speed and being overwhelmed by the techno-commercial society. And therefore, concepts like this find it very difficult to be appreciated or lived.
Uh, Now, talking about wonder, I mean, bringing it out of psychoanalysis, how is it so important for a good quality of life?
It is very important because one Israeli immunologist, I don't remember his name, but he said something very important. He defined happiness as ability to be curious. And this not necessarily is the only definition or the correct definition. It is a partial truth, but there is substance to it. And psychologically speaking, also it's very important because uh, when we see neurosis, one of the characteristics we see is the absorption inside and less focus on the outside. It's very difficult to really focus on the outside world. It's almost as though the libido is withdrawn inside into the complex. And when that happens, the ability to think is impaired to different degrees. And we see when the energy comes out of that complex, one of the things that happens is the creativity and the sense of wonder that goes up. So it is a sign of health when you are able to exercise wonder, creativity, and intuition. Because these are like the top of the end psychological abilities. So it can be kept as a goalpost that when we talk of health, when we look at wonder, creativity, and intuition, they happen only like when you are substantially free from the complex inside, which otherwise saps away the energy and often releases that anxiety. So this is very important in a goalpost sense of the term, very important in quality of life sense of the term, and uh, also very important in the process sense of the term when you look at the inner journey. In the sense, the wonder at oneself itself creates an observational status inside, which is very good for insight generation. The wonder at oneself and the wonder at one's pathology is almost like a therapy which is going on in a mild space inside. So this wonder at oneself is a very important, very powerful tool for self-knowing and self-transformation. Just as the wonder at the outside or wonder at the other is a very powerful tool to understand the other and manage the other. So wonder is a powerful tool apart from being a goalpost and a very strong, good element of quality of life. It also is a very important element from a utilitarian point of view also, because obviously it leads to innovation, it leads to science, it leads to philosophy, it leads to a better quality of life for everyone in a very utilitarian general sense of the term.
Uh, our last question: what can we imagine to save wonder?
We have a society where society is wondering at what is wonder. And this is not a good state or to be in. In this high speed, over technologically dominated, over commercially dominated, skewed format of life, it is necessary for people to step back, take a break, and go out in the woods on a sunny afternoon, not having anything to do, and be with nature. It's only in those states that the kind of natural primal wonder we are talking about can activate in oneself. The kind of natural wonder we are talking about, you can't activate by doing a one-day workshop in a five-star hotel. This needs a different kind of a journey and cutting oneself off from this haste, anxiety, anger, and irritation, which have become like constant companions of everyone 24/7. So, this walk in the woods on a sunny afternoon is a very good visual indicator, metaphorical uh, pointer, a state where one can go into to experience the sense of primary natural wonder, and it opens up a completely different aspect of uh, inquiry, a different aspect of psychological state, a different aspect of our health. And if one continues it with it for some time, uh, one is able to create a very different idea of a good life and bring far more balance, heterogeneity, and richness to it. It, on a social scale, also demands that there has to be some change in the value system and the educational process. And like everything else, this also has to be done in a judicious proportion. We should not have everyone just walking in the woods and doing nothing. If that on the other extreme goes for a long time, then society again wonders, why did we ever wonder at wonder in the first place? And this is a second difficulty of going on the extreme. But uh, within harmonious proportions, I think we need to bring back a far greater element of slowness, naturalness, walk in the woods on a sunny afternoon all alone, that element into our life to bring our own state of affairs into an optimum zone.
From your explanation, somewhere this thought I get is the ability to be
Right.
rather than just keep doing. So to be and to do, somewhere that balance.
True. Because it's almost like uh, what Lao Tzu would say, to be easy and natural and allow the flow to happen. And if one does it in closeness to nature, uh, very soon the sense of this natural primitive wonder springs up.
Right. So I believe by returning more to nature and calming down a little, I believe we can get back this or save this sense of wonder
Yeah, and
in our
bring it more.
hectic urban life. Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for this wonderful discussion. I mean, till today, for me, the word wonder was a very day-to-day, regularly used word. But today, we have dealt with in a very conceptual way,
Yes.
in terms of how it can be used as a part of the therapy or as an idea which can, which can be grown consciously.
Right. Because creativity has been used in art therapy, but this primal natural sense of wonder, which Heidegger puts it so well, astonishment at the world.
Right.
I think that creates a different state, and that state is a different process tool and a different goal for anyone interested in living, also for psychoanalysis.
Thank you for this wonderful discussion again. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.